It started like any other day. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow through the window. Sarah had just finished preparing dinner when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a text message from the school. Reminder, parent-teacher conference tomorrow at 4 p.m. Please be on time. Sarah sighed. Her son, Chris, was already a high school senior. It felt like just yesterday he was excited about his first day of kindergarten. Now he was quiet, withdrawn, and seemed to be constantly at odds with her. She walked into the living room where Chris was sitting in the couch, eyes glued to his phone. She had noticed something different about him lately. He seemed distant, his energy was off, and he had become secretive about who he spent time with. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual as she stood in the doorway. Chris didn't look up. "It was fine," he muttered, his voice low. Sarah watched him for a moment. Something didn't sit right. The conversation seemed to be ending before it even started, and that wasn't like him. Usually, Chris would talk about his friends or classes, but now it was as though he was closing off from her entirely. She wanted to ask more questions but decided against it. She had learned the hard way that pressuring him only pushed him further away. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe it was the way he kept avoiding her gaze, or how often he was going out with his friends lately. Just as she was about to let it go, a small but significant detail caught her attention. The faint smell. It wasn't strong, but it was there, lingering in the air. The smell of burnt tobacco. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible? Was Chris smoking? She had read enough stories to know that this could happen. She had heard about how kids could hide it so well, masking the smell with cologne or chewing gum. But still, this wasn't just a passing thought. It felt too real. Chris had always been the good kid, the one she trusted. But now she found herself wondering if her son had changed in ways she couldn't understand. "Chris," she began slowly, trying to keep her voice calm, "do you know the dangers of smoking? You've heard all the health warnings, right?" Chris glanced up from his phone, his eyes darting nervously for just a second before he shrugged. "Yeah, Mom, I know. I'm fine." Sarah's heart sank as she saw the way he avoided the question. She wanted to ask more, but Chris was already up, heading for the door. "I'm meeting Jake and Tom at the park," he said over his shoulder as he grabbed his jacket. "I'll be back later." "Wait, Chris?" Sarah called, but the door slammed shut before she could finish her sentence. Her mind raced. She had to find out. She had to know what was going on with her son. The next few days passed in a blur of mundane tasks, work, errands, and trying to make dinner while keeping an eye on her son. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Chris. He had started to spend more time out of the house, not coming home until late, and when he was home, he barely spoke. The once vibrant and talkative teenager had become a shell of the person he used to be. One afternoon, as Sarah sat at the kitchen table sipping her coffee, she heard Chris's voice outside the door. He had just come back from a walk, his jacket unzipped and his hands in his pockets. "Hey!" Sarah greeted him cautiously, trying to appear nonchalant. "How was your walk?" "Fine," Chris muttered, keeping his head down as he passed through the door. He was avoiding her again. Sarah's mind raced as she watched him, Was he hiding something from her? The lingering scent of tobacco from before hadn't gone away, and she was starting to wonder if her suspicions were justified. The smell was faint but unmistakable, like it had been carried on his jacket, on his hair. Her heart sank as she realized that he might be hiding it more than she thought. He was getting better at covering it up. Trying to keep her composure, Sarah decided to let it go for the moment. But as the evening wore on, she found herself unable to stop thinking about it. She needed to know for sure. She couldn't just let it slide anymore. As a mother, her instincts told her something was wrong, and it was up to her to find out the truth. That evening, as Chris retreated to his room after dinner, Sarah took a deep breath and made her way to the laundry room. His jacket was hanging on the hook near the back door. Slowly, she picked it up, holding it close to her nose. There it was again, the unmistakable smell of cigarette smoke. Sarah's stomach turned. She had seen this before in stories, read about it in articles, but it felt different when it was her own son. She had always thought Chris was invincible, immune to things like peer pressure. He had always been responsible, cautious, careful with his health. And now the one thing she had never expected seemed to be happening before her eyes. But this wasn't just about the smell. It was about the silence. Chris had become distant, his behavior erratic. She had tried to talk to him, but every time she did, he would shut her out. He was hiding something, and she was afraid it was something far worse than she could imagine. After a long, sleepless night of thinking and worrying, Sarah decided to take action. She needed to confront Chris, but she had to be careful. She knew that pushing him too hard would make him retreat even further. But if she didn't do something now, she might lose him forever. The next morning, Sarah tried to act normal as Chris sat at the kitchen table, eating his breakfast in silence. He was more quiet than usual, even more withdrawn. She had to know if her suspicions were true. "Chris," Sarah said gently, sitting across from him, "can we talk for a minute?" Chris didn't respond at first, his eyes glued to his phone. The silence stretched out for a few long moments before he finally looked up, his expression guarded. "About what?" he asked, his tone flat. "About the way you've been acting lately," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "I've noticed a change in you, and I'm worried. I don't want to invade your privacy, but I need to know what's going on." Chris shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "I'm fine, Mom." "Really?" he muttered, picking at his food. "Chris, I'm not stupid. I know something's going on," she pressed, her voice a little firmer now. "I smelled smoke on your jacket. I know you're hiding something from me." His face paled, and for a moment it seemed like he might say something, but then he just looked away. He wasn't ready to admit it, not yet. "You don't understand," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It's not what you think." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her chest. She could see the internal struggle in his eyes. He wanted to talk, wanted to tell her, but the words seemed to be stuck. And in that moment, she knew. He had been hiding it for a long time. She took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Chris, please. You don't have to keep this secret from me. Smoking is dangerous. It's not just a habit. It's something that could hurt you in ways you don't even understand yet. I don't want to see you make the same mistakes I've seen other kids make." This is serious." Chris shook his head, his jaw tightening. "It's not like that, Mom. I can stop whenever I want. It's not a big deal." The words stung more than Sarah expected. It wasn't the first time she had heard a teenager say that smoking wasn't a big deal. But the dismissiveness in Chris's voice made her realize just how deep his denial ran. "It is a big deal, Chris," she said, her voice softening. "You're my son, and I love you. I don't want to see you make a mistake that you'll regret. You don't understand the damage this can cause. Physically, emotionally. The addiction can take over before you even realize it. And then it's too late." Chris pushed his plate away, standing up quickly. "I don't need this, Mom. I'm fine. You're just overreacting." And just like that, he stormed out of the room, leaving Sarah sitting there, heartbroken. She knew she hadn't gotten through to him. He was still in denial, still refusing to face the reality of his actions. But Sarah couldn't give up. Not now. She had to keep fighting for her son, no matter how much he tried to push her away. The days passed by in a blur of half-hearted attempts at conversations, each one more frustrating than the last. Chris had closed himself off completely, refusing to talk to Sarah about anything meaningful. He would come home late, avoid her questions, and act as if everything was fine. But deep down, Sarah knew he was spiraling. His behavior had changed so drastically that it was impossible for her to ignore the signs any longer. It wasn't just the constant smell of smoke on his clothes, the way he'd leave the house and then return with the faintest hint of it still clinging to him. It was the way his personality had shifted. The boy who used to talk to her about everything now barely spoke at all. He had become moody, distant, and defensive. He started spending more time with a new group of friends she didn't know well, and when she did ask about them, he would give vague answers. She had done everything she could think of. She'd taken him to the doctor, hoping that a conversation with a professional might make him see the dangers of smoking. She had tried the direct approach, the gentle approach, and everything in between. Nothing worked. Chris was as stubborn as ever, and the more she pushed, the more he pulled away. One evening, after Sarah had returned from a long day at work, she found a letter on the kitchen counter. It was from Chris's school, a notice that he had been caught smoking behind the gym during lunch. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just a passing habit anymore. It was serious. She had been right all along. Chris was smoking, and it was getting worse. She sat down at the table, staring at the letter. Her hands shook, and a wave of anger and frustration swept over her. How had it come to this? How had her son, her sweet, responsible boy, ended up in this situation? She knew she needed to act fast. But where would she start? What could she say to make him see that what he was doing wasn't just a harmless phase? She had read countless articles about how addiction crept in without notice, how smoking could grab hold of you when you least expected it. But right now, all Sarah could see was the son she had raised, the son who was slipping away bit by bit. When Chris came home that evening, Sarah was waiting for him. He walked through the door, his face already hardened with the familiar defiance that had become all too common in the last few weeks. "Chris," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "we need to talk." He rolled his eyes, his body stiffening as he avoided looking at her. "I'm really not in the mood, Mom." Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She couldn't let him walk away from this conversation. I saw the letter from your school today. I know you've been smoking behind the gym. I'm not mad, but I need you to listen to me. Chris's eyes flashed with irritation, and for a moment he looked like he might say something harsh, but he bit his tongue. It's no big deal, Mom. I told you I'm fine. Everyone smokes, right? Sarah's heart sank at his words. No, Chris, it's not fine. Smoking is dangerous. It's addictive, and it will take over your life if you let it. I don't want to lose you to this. I'm not losing anything, okay? He snapped back. You're just making it worse. You don't understand. Sarah's voice wavered as she tried to hold back tears. I understand more than you think. I'm your mother, Chris. I know how these things work. You think it's just a way to fit in, to be cool, but it's not. It's killing you. And if you keep going down this path, it's going to ruin everything you've worked for. Chris took a step back, shaking his head. You don't get it. You've never been a teenager. You don't know what it's like. No one cares about what I do, so why should I care? Sarah stood up now, taking a step toward him. Because I care, Chris, and I'm not giving up on you. Not now, not ever. I don't care if your friends are doing it. I care about your future. The anger in Chris's face softened for just a moment. He looked like he might cry, but then the shield went back up. He turned away, running his hand through his hair. I'm just tired of you trying to control me, he muttered, his voice low. I don't want to talk about this anymore. With that, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Sarah stood there, her hands shaking, tears threatening to spill over. She didn't know what to do anymore. She had tried everything. She had spoken to him about the health risks, about how smoking would ruin his future. But nothing seemed to reach him. He was lost in a cloud of smoke, both literally and figuratively, and it felt like she couldn't break through. She felt like she was running out of time, and what terrified her more than anything was the thought that she might be too late. The next day, Chris didn't come home on time. It wasn't unusual for him to stay out late with his friends, but Sarah's gut told her something was wrong. She tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Her anxiety grew, and by the time midnight rolled around, she could barely sit still. The door finally opened around 12:30 a.m., and Chris staggered in, his eyes glassy and unfocused. He reeked of alcohol and something else, something heavier, something darker. The familiar scent of cigarette smoke was stronger than it had ever been, and it made Sarah's stomach turn. "Where were you?" Sarah demanded, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. Chris stumbled into the living room, his movements sluggish. He barely looked at her as he shrugged. "Out with friends." "I've been calling you," she said, her voice cracking. "Do you have any idea how worried I've been?" Chris's gaze finally met hers, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah saw the vulnerability in his eyes. But it didn't last long. He quickly looked away, clearly embarrassed by the tears that were now threatening to spill from her eyes. "Just go to bed, Mom. I'm fine." But Sarah knew he wasn't fine. He wasn't fine, and deep down, neither was she. Sarah's heart was heavy as the days passed in silence. It felt as though the distance between her and Chris was growing wider with every passing minute. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how many times she reached out, he continued to pull away. The smoking had become just one of many issues she had to face, but it was the one that hurt the most. It wasn't just about the cigarettes, it was about how he was changing, how he was slipping away from her. She couldn't shake the memory of the way Chris had looked at her when he came home that night. There had been a flicker of vulnerability, of guilt, but it had been quickly masked by his usual defensive walls. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized how deeply his addiction had taken root. That Friday evening after work, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. Chris had been home for hours but hadn't spoken a word to her. He was locked in his room again, and the only sign of life was the faint sound of music drifting beneath the door. The thought of confronting him again made her stomach churn. The last conversation had left them both bruised, emotionally battered. She had to do something. She had to break through, find a way to reach him before it was too late. But how? Every time she spoke, it felt like she was speaking to a wall. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stood up and grabbed her jacket. She couldn't sit and wait anymore. She needed answers, and she needed to do something. She knew that the longer she allowed this to go on, the worse it would get. She didn't want to lose him. She couldn't. She drove to the local park, the one Chris often went to when he needed to think, to be alone. When she got there, she didn't see him right away. The park was quiet and the evening air had a crisp chill. She parked the car and walked slowly, her steps heavy with the weight of the decision she was about to make. As she rounded the corner by the basketball courts, she saw him. Chris was sitting on a bench, his back to her, a cigarette dangling loosely between his fingers. His eyes were fixed on the ground in front of him, and the faint glow of the end of the cigarette lit up his face in the dim light. Sarah stopped in her tracks. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The sight of him like this, alone with a cigarette in his hand, hit her harder than she expected. He didn't see her, and she stood there frozen, her heart aching. After a long pause, she took a step forward, clearing her throat. "Chris," she said softly. He flinched, the cigarette nearly falling from his hand as he turned to face her. His expression immediately hardened, the mask of indifference slipping back into place. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, his voice defensive. "I could ask you the same thing," Sarah replied gently, her heart breaking at the sight of her son like this. She took a slow step closer, her voice trembling. "Chris, please, let me in. Let me help you." Chris stood up, brushing past her as he shoved the cigarette into his pocket. "I don't need your help, Mom. Just leave me alone, I'm fine." "You're not fine, Chris," Sarah said, stepping in front of him, blocking his way. "This isn't you. You've been hiding this from me, from everyone. You think you can just keep pretending it's not a problem, but it is. I know it. You know it. Please, let me help." Chris looked at her, his jaw clenched, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep or perhaps from too much stress. He shook his head, his shoulders sagging. "You don't get it. You don't understand. You're just going to make it worse." "I'm not here to make it worse," Sarah replied, her voice soft but firm. "I'm here because I love you, Chris. You don't have to do this alone, but you have to let me in. I can't help you if you keep pushing me away." Chris ran his hand through his hair, frustration and anger flashing in his eyes. "You just don't get it," Everyone's always telling me what to do. I just want to be left alone. Why can't you just let me be? I'm not a kid anymore." "I know you're not a kid, Chris," Sarah said quietly, her heart aching for him. "But you're still my son, and I can't stand by and watch you hurt yourself. I know you think this is helping, but it's not. It's destroying you. I'm not asking you to quit overnight, but you need to stop hiding from the truth. You need help." For a long moment, Chris didn't say anything. He just stared at her, and for a second, Sarah thought maybe she had reached him. Maybe there was still hope. But then he looked down, his face contorting with frustration and confusion. "I'm not ready to quit, Mom. I can't just stop like that," he muttered. "I'm not asking you to quit all at once," Sarah said, her voice filled with compassion. "But I need you to promise me that you'll at least talk to someone about it. You're not alone in this. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself." Chris's eyes welled up with tears, but he quickly wiped them away, furious with himself for letting her see. "I don't want to talk to anyone. You wouldn't understand. No one understands." Sarah took a step closer, gently placing her hand on his shoulder. "I understand more than you think. I've seen the pain in your eyes, Chris. I've seen how hard you're trying to keep it all together. But you don't have to do it alone. Please let me help." Chris stood there for a moment, shaking his head, clearly conflicted. The cigarette in his pocket burned a hole in his jacket, a symbol of the battle raging inside him. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping as he looked up at her. "Okay, Mom. I'll talk to someone," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But I don't know if I can stop." Sarah felt a small sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him close as he trembled in her embrace. "You don't have to do it alone," she whispered, feeling a tear slip down her cheek. "We'll take it one step at a time, together." The days that followed Chris's reluctant promise to talk to someone felt like a slow crawl for Sarah. While Chris had agreed to visit a counselor, it didn't feel like much of a victory. His demeanor hadn't changed. He still pulled away, still retreated into the shadows of his room, refusing to speak about what he had been hiding. The cigarette pack seemed to multiply in his pockets, in his bag, and Sarah was more convinced than ever that the addiction was stronger than he realized. Sarah did everything she could to encourage him. She gently reminded him about his promise to go to counseling, gave him space when he asked for it, and even tried to give him her own stories of overcoming obstacles. But Chris would nod, tell her that he was fine, and then go right back to the same behaviors. The distance between them was only growing. She tried to remain hopeful. She tried to remind herself that change didn't happen overnight. After all, the road to recovery was long and filled with setbacks. Still, it was difficult to watch her son self-destruct. He was no longer the young man she had raised. Now he seemed like a stranger, someone she was desperately trying to save, but who seemed to be pulling away from her at every turn. That afternoon, Sarah went to visit the counselor who Chris had started seeing. She had been in contact with him a few times, but this would be the first time they would meet face to face. She needed to know what was going on. She needed to know what more she could do to help her son. The counselor had assured her that Chris was opening up during sessions, but Sarah wasn't so sure. The things she saw at home didn't match up with the image of a kid who was improving that the counselor seemed to paint. She arrived early for the meeting, sitting in the small waiting room, her fingers nervously tapping the armrest. When the counselor finally came out to greet her, he gave her a warm but exhausted smile. "Mrs. Miller, it's good to see you again. Let's have a seat and talk," he said kindly as they both made their way to the office. Sarah couldn't waste time with pleasantries. She needed answers. "How is Chris doing, really? Is he showing any signs of progress?" she asked as soon as they sat down. The counselor's smile faded slightly. "He's resistant. That's the truth. But that's to be expected. When someone is dealing with addiction, it's very common to resist change, especially when they don't fully recognize the problem themselves." "I see that," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. "But I don't know how much longer I can watch him slowly destroy himself. I don't know what to do." The counselor took a deep breath. "It's important that you understand addiction doesn't just affect the person using the substance. It affects everyone around them, the family, the friends, the relationships. Chris is still in denial, but he's acknowledging the need for help. That's something. That's a start." Sarah nodded, but doubt clouded her thoughts. She wanted to believe that Chris was on the road to recovery, but she wasn't sure she could keep waiting for him to take the first step. "When he's at home," she continued, her voice breaking, "he seems even worse than before. He's distant, defensive, and the smoking hasn't stopped. It's only getting worse, and I'm scared. How do I reach him? How do I get him to understand that this is a life or death situation?" The counselor leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Chris is still struggling with the concept of addiction. The biggest hurdle for him is accepting that he doesn't have control over the situation. That's why he's pushing you away. Addiction thrives on denial, and the longer he holds on to it, the harder it will be to help him." "Then what do I do?" Sarah asked, her voice full of frustration. "He won't listen. He won't talk to me. He won't even try to change." "You need to be consistent with him," the counselor said, his voice calm and steady. "Let him know that you love him, that you care, and that you're there to help him. But you also need to set boundaries. You can't enable him to continue down this path. Sometimes love means tough love." Sarah's heart sank. Tough love? That sounds like giving up on him. "Not at all," the counselor replied gently. "It means holding him accountable. Let him see that his actions have consequences. He's still at a point where he needs someone to show him the path. Even if he's resistant, he's not going to change overnight. But if you stand firm in your boundaries, he'll start to see the truth." The conversation with the counselor gave Sarah some clarity, but it also left her feeling more helpless than ever. She had to do more. She had to take control of the situation, even if Chris didn't like it. But how? How could she set boundaries when her heart ached every time she saw him slipping further into the addiction that was slowly taking over his life? That night, Sarah made a decision. She was going to have one final conversation with Chris. She wasn't going to let him hide anymore. She would be firm, but she would also be loving. She couldn't save him if he wasn't willing to save himself. Later that evening, as Chris entered the kitchen, she stood up, her face set with determination. "Chris, we need to talk." He looked at her with irritation, already preparing to fight. "Mom, not now. I'm really not in the mood." Sarah took a deep breath. "This isn't about being in the mood, Chris. This is about your life. I know you're smoking, and I'm not going to pretend like it's okay anymore. You need to make a choice. Do you want help, or do you want to keep going down this path? I can't force you to quit, but I won't keep enabling you." Chris froze, the words sinking in. He didn't respond, but Sarah could see the internal battle in his eyes. For a moment, she thought he might break down, might tell her everything. But instead, he turned and walked out of the room. Sarah stood there, her heart heavy in her chest. She knew this was only the beginning. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be fast. But she was done waiting. She would fight for her son, no matter how long it took. She just hoped he would choose to fight with her. The following days were tense. Chris barely spoke to Sarah after their confrontation. Every time she tried to talk to him, he would retreat into his room or mumble a few words before quickly disappearing. It was as though he was trying to shut out everything that mattered. But for Sarah, it was harder than ever to stay silent. She knew the tough love approach wasn't going to be easy. Every time Chris avoided her, she could feel her heart breaking a little more. But she also knew that if she let him continue down this path, it could end up destroying him. The realization hit her hard. The more she pushed, the more he pulled away. He was becoming someone she didn't recognize, and it was terrifying. It was Saturday morning when the tipping point came. Chris had been gone for several hours. Sarah wasn't sure where he was, probably with his friends, she thought. But something inside her told her that this time, she couldn't wait for him to come back and hide behind his excuses. She had to find him, confront him, and force him to face the truth. She put on her shoes and grabbed her keys, determination flooding her veins. She wasn't about to let this go any longer. The memory of the cigarette butts in his room, the faint smell of smoke that had never quite disappeared, lingered in her mind. She could no longer ignore the fact that her son was slipping further away from her. She drove through the streets of their neighborhood, scanning the faces of the kids on the sidewalk. Her mind raced, thinking of all the places Chris might have gone: the park, the small convenience store by the corner, anywhere his friends would hang out. And then she saw him. Chris was sitting on the steps of an old convenience store, talking to a group of unfamiliar faces. Some of the boys had cigarettes in their hands, and she could see them passing one around. Her heart sank, the realization crashing over her like a tidal wave. There was no denying it anymore. Her son was no longer just experimenting. He was part of it. He was smoking regularly, and he had been hiding it for months. Sarah parked the car a little further down the road, her hands tight on the steering wheel. She wanted to get out and march straight to him, drag him back to the car and force him to listen. But she knew that wouldn't work. If she approached him like that, she would lose him completely. Instead, she took a deep breath, wiped the tears that had formed in her eyes, and slowly got out of the car. She walked toward him, her heart pounding. The kids saw her approaching, and Chris's eyes widened in surprise. His expression quickly shifted to one of irritation, and he stood up, pushing past his friends to face her. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, his face flushed with anger. "You can't just show up like this. It's embarrassing." "I'm here to talk to you, Chris," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been trying to get through to you, but you've been shutting me out. You think I don't see what's happening? I see it. I see the cigarettes. I smell it on you. I see the way you've been acting. You think you're hiding it from me, but I know." Chris's face turned redder. He looked at his friends, his eyes darting around, trying to avoid his mother's gaze. "It's not a big deal, Mom. You're making a big deal out of nothing." Sarah's frustration boiled over, but she held her ground. "It's a big deal, Chris. You're putting your health at risk. I know it's hard to understand now, but this isn't just some cool thing. It's an addiction, and you're letting it take over. You don't even realize what you're doing to yourself." Chris shook his head, stepping back. "I'm not a kid anymore. You can't control me. I can do what I want." "Not when it's killing you," Sarah's voice cracked, her tears threatening to spill. "You're not invincible, Chris. You're my son, and I can't sit back and watch you destroy yourself. I love you too much to just let you make these mistakes without fighting for you." Chris's eyes flickered for a second, like he was struggling with what to say. Then he threw his hands up in frustration. "You don't get it. You never will. You're just trying to control me just like everyone else. I'm fine. I can stop whenever I want." "Chris, please," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm begging you. You have to listen. You have to get help. This isn't something you can just ignore. I don't want to lose you." Chris was silent for a moment, staring at her. For a split second, it felt like she might have reached him. Then, as quickly as it came, the moment was gone. He stepped back again, his expression hardening. "I don't need your help, Mom. Just leave me alone." Without another word, Chris turned and walked away from her, disappearing into the crowd of friends. The drive home was a blur. Sarah's mind raced with everything that had just happened. How had it gotten this far? How had she missed the signs? She had seen him changing, but she hadn't realized just how deep the problem ran. When she got home, Sarah sat in the living room, staring at the walls. She had tried to get through to Chris. She had tried to make him understand, but he had shut her out, just like he had done every time before. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a text from the school principal. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about Chris. There has been an incident. Please come to the school immediately." Her stomach dropped. What had happened now? She stood up, her heart pounding. She had known this day would come, the day when it would all come crashing down. And now it was here. She didn't know what the next step was, but she couldn't let this go any further. She had to find a way to save him before it was too late. The drive to the school felt longer than it should have. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing as she replayed the text from the principal. What had Chris done now? The worry that had been building in her chest grew with each passing minute. She had been dreading this moment for weeks, and now it seemed like it was finally here. When she arrived at the school, the principal was waiting for her by the front doors, his face somber and his arms crossed over his chest. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had never seen him look this serious. "Mrs. Miller," he said quietly, gesturing for her to follow him. "I'm afraid there's been an incident involving Chris. It's best that we speak in my office." Sarah's stomach twisted. She followed him, trying to keep her breathing steady, But the anxiety bubbling inside her was impossible to ignore. They reached the office, and as the principal closed the door behind them, Sarah felt the weight of the conversation ahead. "Please sit down," he said, motioning to the chair across from his desk. Sarah sat down, trying to steady herself. "I'm sure you've noticed some changes in Chris's behavior," the principal began, his voice calm but firm. "Recently, he's been caught smoking in the school bathroom. We've had several reports from his teachers and peers that he's been frequently late to class and has been acting out more often." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. She had known. She had known for a long time. But hearing it out loud from someone else made it feel even more real. "I'm afraid Chris is not only putting himself at risk, but he's also affecting the school environment," the principal continued. "We've had to issue a formal warning. If this behavior continues, we will have to take further disciplinary action." Sarah's mind spun. A warning? Was this really happening? Was her son really getting in trouble at school because of something so trivial, so destructive? She felt her chest tighten as a wave of guilt washed over her. Had she missed the signs? Had she failed him somehow? "I understand, but I just don't know how to get through to him," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've tried everything. I've talked to him. I've tried to make him understand the dangers, but nothing seems to work. He's not listening to me. He's shutting me out." The principal's expression softened. "You're not alone in this, Mrs. Miller. Many parents are struggling with similar issues. Adolescence is a difficult time, and sometimes the more we try to intervene, the more they push back. But you're doing the right thing by staying involved. You have to keep reaching out." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to fall. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to lose him. I'm scared. I'm scared he's going to ruin his future, and I don't know how to stop it." The principal leaned forward, his gaze compassionate. "The fact that you care, that you're willing to fight for him, is a good sign, but it's going to be a long road. You might not see immediate results, but that doesn't mean you should give up. Chris needs help, and you're doing the right thing by being here, by showing up." Sarah nodded, trying to take in his words. She had to stay strong for Chris. She had to keep fighting for him. No matter how hard it was, she had to be his advocate, his support, even when he didn't want it. As she left the school, Sarah felt a weight in her chest. The conversation with the principal had been a wake-up call. Chris wasn't just going through a phase. He wasn't just experimenting with smoking. It was deeper than that. He was struggling, and he didn't know how to ask for help. He had become trapped in his own denial, and Sarah didn't know how to break him free. That evening, when Chris came home, Sarah was waiting for him. She didn't want to confront him in anger, but she couldn't ignore the truth anymore. She had to get through to him. She had to make him see that he was destroying himself. "Chris," she began, her voice soft but firm, "we need to talk. I'm not going to let this go. I know what's been going on. I know about the smoking, and I'm not going to pretend like it's okay anymore." Chris stopped in his tracks, his face hardening as he looked at her. "You don't get it, Mom. You don't know what it's like. You don't understand how hard it is. I just need something to take the edge off." Sarah's heart shattered at his words. She had known that Chris was struggling, but hearing him admit it, hearing the pain in his voice, was more than she could bear. "I do understand," she said, stepping closer. "I understand more than you think. I know what it's like to feel lost, to want to escape. But this is not the answer. Smoking is not the solution. It's destroying you, Chris. You don't see it now, but it will. It already is." Chris shook his head, his voice tinged with anger and frustration. "You don't know what it's like to be me. You don't know what it's like to feel alone, to feel like nothing matters. This is the only thing that makes me feel okay." The words hit Sarah like a slap in the face. She hadn't realized just how deeply Chris had fallen into the trap of his own despair. She had been so focused on the smoking, on the immediate danger, that she hadn't fully understood the emotional pain that was driving him to it. "I know you're hurting, Chris," Sarah said softly, reaching out for him. "I know you feel lost, but this is not the way to find yourself. Please talk to me. Let me help you." For a moment, Chris stood still, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He looked at Sarah, and for a second it seemed like he might say something. But then, just like before, the wall went back up. He turned away, his voice cold. "I'm fine, Mom. You don't need to keep doing this. I don't need your help." And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving Sarah standing there, feeling more helpless than ever. The next few days passed in a blur of frustration, worry, and sadness. Chris's behavior had only worsened since their last confrontation. He became even more withdrawn, locking himself in his room, refusing to speak to her or even make eye contact. Sarah's heart was breaking with every passing moment. She had tried so hard to reach him, to break through the walls he had built, but it felt like everything she did only pushed him further away. Her nights were filled with restless thoughts, wondering if she was too late. Was her son already lost? Was there anything left she could do to help him? She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. It wasn't until a week later, when she received a call from the school, that everything came to a head. "Mrs. Miller, this is Principal Thompson," the voice on the other end of the phone said, the tone of the call already making Sarah's heart race. "I'm afraid we have a serious situation involving Chris." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What happened? Is he okay?" Her voice cracked as fear gripped her chest. "He's been caught smoking again, this time in the school parking lot, and unfortunately, he's been involved in an altercation with another student. We've had to call the police." The words hit Sarah like a freight train. Chris had been caught smoking again, but this time it was worse. An altercation? The panic in Sarah's chest began to turn into something darker, something deeper. She had always known that Chris was heading down a dangerous path, but hearing it out loud, hearing about his involvement with the police, made it all too real. "I'll be right there," Sarah managed to say, hanging up the phone. Her hands shook as she grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, the cold night air doing little to calm her nerves. When she arrived at the school, Chris was sitting in the principal's office, his face bruised and his clothes disheveled. He looked up when Sarah entered, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. She could see the shame in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make him open up. Principal Thompson stood up as Sarah approached. "Mrs. Miller, I'm afraid the situation is serious. Chris and another student got into an argument in the parking lot. The other student has a minor injury, but it's the smoking that's really concerning. We've called the police because of the altercation, and Chris is facing some consequences. I'm afraid he's suspended for the next 2 weeks. Sarah's head spun. The weight of everything she had been fearing had come crashing down all at once. Her son had gotten into a physical fight, and now he was facing police involvement. The reality of it all felt suffocating. "Chris, what happened?" she asked softly, trying to stay calm. Her voice wavered as she looked at her son, who was sitting with his head down, avoiding her gaze. I don't know," Chris muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were just talking, and then... I don't know. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand." "I'm not talking about that," Sarah said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm asking about the smoking, Chris. Why didn't you listen to me? Why didn't you tell me what was really going on?" Chris didn't look up. He just sat there, his hands clenched into fists in his lap. For a long time he didn't speak. It was as though he was still trapped in his own denial, his own shame. "I didn't want you to be disappointed," he finally muttered, his voice low. "I didn't want you to hate me." Sarah's heart broke hearing those words. "Chris, I don't hate you. I never have. I love you. That's why I've been so hard on you. I see you destroying yourself and it hurts. I just want you to understand how serious this is." Chris shook his head. "You don't get it. I'm not you, Mom. I'm not perfect. I'm not the kid you want me to be." "Chris, you don't have to be perfect," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "You just have to be you. But you have to be the healthy version of you. I can't stand by and watch you throw your life away." For the first time, Chris looked up at her, his eyes filled with frustration and fear. "I'm not throwing my life away," he snapped. "I'm just trying to live. I don't know what you want from me. I want you to live, Chris. I want you to live without the crutch of smoking, without hiding behind something that's hurting you. You have so much potential. I know you do. But this is a dead end." Chris didn't respond. He just sat there, his face pale, the weight of everything he had been carrying finally breaking through. Sarah wanted to reach out to him, to hold him, to make everything better, but she knew she couldn't. He had to make the decision to change, and she could only stand by and support him through it. The principal spoke up again. "Mrs. Miller, I've arranged for Chris to meet with the school counselor. I believe we can help him work through some of this, but he's going to need to take responsibility for his actions. I think it's time we take this seriously." Sarah nodded, still reeling from everything that had happened. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll make sure he gets the help he needs." When they left the principal's office, Sarah walked beside Chris in silence. The air between them was heavy, the weight of everything that had just happened sinking in. She could feel the divide between them, the gap that had grown too wide for her to cross alone. But she wouldn't give up on him. Not now, not ever. As they got into the car, Sarah turned to Chris. "We'll get through this, okay? But you have to promise me that you'll try. You have to take the first step." Chris didn't say anything, but he didn't pull away either. For the first time in a long while, he seemed to let his guard down just a little. The days following the meeting with the principal felt like an emotional roller coaster for Sarah. She was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally, constantly torn between hope and despair. Chris had reluctantly agreed to attend counseling, but he wasn't truly ready. He had gone to his first session, but he still held back, his walls up, refusing to be completely open. It was as though he was stuck in a cycle, unsure of how to move forward, but afraid of letting go. At home, things were still tense. Chris was quiet, more withdrawn than ever, as though the weight of the confrontation had left him broken, but unwilling to admit it. Sarah could see that he was struggling. She could see the frustration in his eyes, but he refused to talk about it. She tried to approach him gently, but every attempt was met with a shrug or a few short words, as though he was trying to keep her at arm's length. One evening, after Chris had come home late again, Sarah knew she couldn't wait any longer. The signs were clear. Chris was still battling his addiction, still running from the reality of it. But Sarah couldn't keep waiting for him to make the first move. She couldn't let him continue down this dangerous path. It was a Tuesday night, and the house was quiet. Sarah had just finished cleaning up after dinner, and she sat at the kitchen table, her mind racing with thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. When Chris came home, he barely acknowledged her. He walked straight to his room, his hoodie pulled over his head, and slammed the door behind him. Sarah's heart sank, but she knew what she had to do. This was her last chance to make him see how much his actions were hurting, not just him, but everyone around him. She stood up, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to let him hide anymore. With trembling hands, she knocked on his door. "Chris, we need to talk." There was no answer. She knocked again, this time louder. "Chris, open the door." After a few moments of silence, the door creaked open. Chris stood there, his eyes guarded, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at her, but he didn't speak. "Can we please talk?" Sarah said, her voice softer now. "I need to know what's going on, Chris. I need you to understand that I'm not giving up on you, but I can't help you if you don't let me in." Chris looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't want to talk about it, Mom. I'm fine. You don't have to worry." "I do worry, Chris. I can't just sit here and watch you self-destruct," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "This isn't just about smoking. This is about you. You're pushing everyone away. You're shutting me out, and I can't stand it. You're not fine, and I need you to admit that. You're not okay." For a long moment, Chris didn't say anything. His face was a mask of frustration, but Sarah could see the cracks forming. There was something more, something deeper, that he was afraid to face. She could almost hear him screaming for help, but he couldn't bring himself to admit it. "Chris," Sarah said, stepping closer, "I know you're struggling. I know you're angry, and I know you feel like no one understands. But I'm here. I'm right here. You don't have to do this alone." Chris's eyes filled with tears, but he quickly wiped them away, turning his face to the side. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mom. I don't know how to stop." Sarah's heart broke at his words. She had been waiting for him to say something, anything that would show that he was ready to fight this, but she hadn't expected him to admit it like this. "You don't have to stop alone, Chris," she said gently, reaching out to touch his arm. "I know it's hard, But we'll do this together. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself." Chris took a shaky breath, his face crumpling. "I'm scared," he whispered. "I don't know how to make it stop." "I know," Sarah whispered back, pulling him into a tight hug. "But I'm here, and I'll help you through it, one step at a time. You're not alone." They stood there in silence for a long time, the weight of everything that had happened settling over them. Chris didn't pull away, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt like she was getting through to him. The following weeks weren't easy. Chris continued to attend counseling, though at first it was clear he was still hesitant. The process was slow, and there were many moments where Sarah wasn't sure if anything would change. But there was a shift, a small yet important shift. Chris started talking to her more, even if it was just about small things. He no longer shut her out completely. He also began making changes in his routine. He would go for walks after school, not to hang out with friends, but to clear his head. And for the first time in a long while, he had stopped asking to go out late at night. He didn't want to be alone with his thoughts anymore. He wanted to be around his family, around people who cared. But the hardest part for Sarah was the days when Chris would slip, when she would find him sitting alone in his room, staring at the half-empty pack of cigarettes on his desk. She knew the temptation was still there, lurking in the background. She knew it wouldn't be easy for him to quit. There would be setbacks, moments of weakness. But she also knew that the road to recovery wasn't linear. It was filled with ups and downs. One night, a few weeks after their breakthrough conversation, Sarah found Chris sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. She stepped outside, sitting down next to him, silently offering him her presence. "I haven't smoked in a few days," he said quietly, his voice low. "But it's still hard. I keep thinking about it." "You're doing great, Chris," Sarah said softly. "It's okay to think about it. What matters is that you're choosing to fight it." Chris nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm trying. It's just hard." "I know," Sarah said, putting her arm around him. "But you're not alone. We'll get through it together, one day at a time." For the first time in months, Chris smiled. It was small, but it was real. The weeks passed slowly, and though it wasn't easy, Sarah felt a sense of relief knowing that Chris was trying. The small moments of progress, his decision to attend counseling, his willingness to talk about his struggles, and his genuine effort to avoid smoking, gave her hope that he was finally seeing the light. But deep down, she knew the hardest part of the journey still lay ahead. The temptation, the cravings, the pressure from his friends. Chris had a long road ahead of him. One evening after dinner, Sarah sat at the kitchen table reading a book. Chris had been quieter than usual that day, and she could tell he was thinking about something. He had taken a few steps forward in his recovery, but Sarah knew how fragile his progress was. She wanted to ask him how he was feeling, but she didn't want to pressure him. Finally, Chris walked into the room, his hands in his pockets, his gaze focused on the floor. Sarah looked up and smiled gently, trying to make the atmosphere less heavy. "How's it going?" she asked softly, hoping to keep things light. Chris hesitated for a moment before sitting down across from her. His fingers drummed nervously on the table. "I don't know, Mom. I feel better, but I keep thinking about it, about smoking." I understand, Sarah said, her voice gentle. It's not something that just goes away, is it? The cravings can be really hard. Chris sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. I don't want to smoke, but sometimes I don't know. It feels like everything's so messed up, like nothing's ever going to feel right again. The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had been so focused on helping him quit smoking that she hadn't fully considered the emotional toll it was taking on him. He wasn't just battling an addiction. He was also battling the pain of feeling lost, of not knowing who he was or how to handle everything he was going through. I think a lot of people feel like that, Chris, Sarah said quietly, but that doesn't mean it's the end. It just means you have to keep going, and I'm here with you every step of the way. Chris looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I know, I just don't want to let you down again. I hate that I've been doing this to myself, and I hate that I've been lying to you. Sarah reached across the table, gently resting her hand on his. You're not letting me down. You're not perfect, and neither am I. We all make mistakes. What matters is that you're here now. You're trying, and that's more than I could ever ask for. We're in this together. There was a long silence, and then Chris nodded slowly, the weight of his emotions lifting just slightly. I'll keep trying, Mom. I promise. The weeks continued to pass with their ups and downs. Chris had good days. Days where he felt strong, where he didn't even think about smoking. And then there were the bad days, the days when the cravings were too much to bear, when the pressure from his friends was overwhelming, and when he felt like giving up. But each time he struggled, Sarah was there. She didn't give up on him, even when he tried to push her away. She understood that recovery wasn't a straight line. It was a winding road with bumps, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But as long as Chris was trying, as long as he was still fighting, she knew there was hope. One afternoon after school, Sarah was sitting in the living room when Chris walked in. He looked more exhausted than usual, his face pale and drawn. She immediately stood up, concern washing over her. Chris, what's wrong? You don't look well. I'm okay, he said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm just tired, I guess. Sarah stepped closer, her worry growing. Chris, you don't have to hide it. If you're struggling, I need to know. We can work through it together. He hesitated, looking down at the floor. I don't know, Mom. Today was just hard. I was around my friends, and they were smoking. They kept offering me one, and I almost said yes. But I didn't. I swear. But it's getting harder, and I'm afraid that I won't be able to keep saying no. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. It was one thing to hear about the struggles from a distance, but it was another to hear it directly from Chris. She could see how much he was hurting, how torn he was between the desire to quit and the pull of his old habits. I'm proud of you for saying no, she said softly, wrapping her arms around him. That's huge, Chris. You're stronger than you think. But I also understand that it's not easy. You're doing a great job, but we can talk to someone if you need more help. You don't have to fight this battle alone. Chris nodded, his shoulders sagging in exhaustion. I know, Mom. I just don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I know it's hard, Sarah whispered, but we can keep fighting together. We'll take it one day at a time, okay? Chris hugged her back, the weight of his emotions finally pouring out. Sarah held him tightly, knowing that this wasn't the end of the road, but only another step in the journey. He wasn't cured, and the road to recovery was still a long one, but the fact that he was trying, that he hadn't given up, was everything. The next few months were filled with both challenges and victories. Chris continued with his counseling sessions, slowly making progress, but the temptation never fully went away. He had good days and bad days, and some days he didn't feel like he was getting anywhere at all. But with Sarah by his side, encouraging him, supporting him, and loving him through the struggle, he began to realize that recovery wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. It wasn't a quick fix, and there were times when he wanted to give up, but with every step forward, he felt a little stronger. And as he began to rebuild his relationship with his mother and gain back her trust, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he could start rebuilding himself too.